The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest room in the known universe. It could hold 10,000 beings from 100 different worlds. Today, only 50 sat in the floating seats that circled the central platform, but every single one of them was silent. High Arbiter Voreth stood at the center. He was tall and thin, with gray skin that looked like old stone. His species, the Melari, were known for their calm voices and cold logic, but today, even Voreth looked troubled. "Play the footage," he said. A hologram appeared above the platform. It showed a dark cave filled with shadows and strange rock formations. The camera moved deeper into the darkness. Then it stopped. Three small creatures huddled together in a corner. They had soft blue-silver fur, large round eyes, and tiny hands that gripped each other tightly. They were Velan cubs, no more than 1 cycle old. In human terms, they were bobbies. Around them, something moved in the darkness. Long, pale shapes slithered between the rocks. They had no eyes, no legs, just endless coils of white flesh and mouths full of needle-thin teeth. These were the Sketh, the most feared predators on the planet Yelos 7. The footage ended. The chamber remained silent. "The cubs wandered into the Blackmire Caverns 3 days ago," Voreth explained. "Their mother was visiting the research station nearby. There was an accident. The children ran into the caves during the confusion." A Koreth commander stood up. His name was Reth. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with thick armored plates covering his body and claws that could cut through steel. The Koreth were apex predators. They feared nothing in the galaxy. "We sent 2 rescue teams," Reth said. His voice was deep and heavy with shame. "Both teams failed. The Sketh release a toxin into the air that causes paralysis and terror. My warriors could not even get close. They ran. The greatest hunters in the galaxy ran from those caves like frightened children." Another voice spoke up. It belonged to a small creature covered in soft white feathers. "The Velan are pacifists. They have no warriors, no weapons. They cannot save their own young." "Then what do you suggest?" asked a delegate from the back. "Do we simply let the cubs die?" No one answered. The hologram changed to show a map of the caverns. Red dots marked the location of the cubs. Blue lines showed the paths the rescue teams had tried. All of them ended in failure. "The Sketh hunt through vibration and bioelectrical fields," Voreth said. "They can sense fear. They can sense aggression. Any creature that enters those caves with hostile intent will be swarmed. Any creature that enters with fear will be hunted." "Then it is impossible," Reth said quietly. "No living being can enter without fear." Far from the council chamber, floating in the quiet darkness of space, the human diplomatic vessel Horizon received an emergency transmission. Commander Shin Hana read the message 3 times. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and short black hair. She had served in the human fleet for 15 years. She had seen wars, disasters, and impossible situations. But this message made her pause. 3 Velan cubs," she whispered to herself. "Trapped, dying, and no one can save them." She knew what she had to do. She knew who she needed to find. The cargo bay of the Horizon was a mess of crates, equipment, and strange alien plants that no one remembered collecting. In the corner, sitting on an old storage box, was a man feeding something small and furry with 3 legs. His name was Park Tiho. He was 34 years old, average height, average build. He had messy black hair, tired eyes, and hands covered in small scars from animal bites and scratches. He wore a worn-out jacket that had seen too many planets and not enough washing machines. Tiho was a wildlife rescue specialist. That was his official title. In reality, he was the person humans called when something living was in danger and no one else was crazy enough to help. He had once walked into a nest of territorial Drexians to return their stolen eggs. The Drexians were bird-like predators with razor-sharp beaks and a hatred for all other species. Tiho had spent 6 hours sitting perfectly still while they decided whether to kill him or not. In the end, they let him go. No one knew why. He had also retrieved survivors from a collapsing hive world, carried injured soldiers through toxic swamps, and once talked a panicking alien out of self-destructing its ship by singing children's songs for 4 hours straight. Tiho was not brave, he was not strong, he was just very, very stubborn, and he had a weakness for anything small and helpless. Tiho, Hana said as she walked into the cargo bay. He looked up. The three-legged creature in his lap made a happy chirping sound. "Commander, what's wrong?" Hana handed him a datapad with the transmission. Tiho read it slowly. His expression did not change, but his hand stopped moving. "Velen cubs," he said. 3 of them, trapped in caves full of sketh. 2 Koreth rescue teams already failed. The cubs have maybe 2 days left. Tiho stared at the image of the 3 small creatures huddled together in the darkness. "How old?" he asked. "Less than 1 cycle, Bobby's basically." Tiho was quiet for a long time. Then he gently placed the 3-legged creature on the floor and stood up. "Tell the council I'm coming," he said. "Tiho," Hana grabbed his arm. "This is a suicide mission. The sketh can sense fear, they can sense aggression. You go in there, you die." Tiho smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of a man who had heard those words too many times. "Then I won't be afraid," he said, "and I won't be aggressive." "That's impossible. You're human. You feel fear like everyone else." Tiho picked up his jacket and slung it over his shoulder. "Yes," he agreed. "I feel fear, but I also feel other things, and right now those other things are louder." He walked toward the door, then stopped. "Commander, when I was 7 years old, my grandmother told me something. She said that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. I have been afraid my whole life, but I have also saved a lot of lives." He looked back at her. "Those cubs are alone in the dark. They are scared. They are waiting for someone to come. I am going to be that someone." Hana watched him go. She did not try to stop him. She had known Tiho for 5 years. She knew that once he decided to save something, nothing in the galaxy could change his mind. She just hoped the galaxy would not take him from her this time. The council chamber erupted when they heard a human had volunteered. Some laughed, some argued, some simply stared in disbelief. "One human," Reth demanded. "My warriors, the greatest hunters in the galaxy, failed, and you send one soft, weak human." Voreth raised a hand for silence. "The human has a reputation. He has done impossible things before." "Impossible things do not include walking through a nest of sketh." "Perhaps not, but we have no other options." On the planet below, the 3 Velen cubs pressed closer together. The darkness around them moved and whispered. The sketh were getting closer. They could smell the fear. They could taste it in the air. The cubs did not understand what was happening. They only knew that they were cold, hungry, and scared. They wanted their mother. They wanted to go home. Somewhere in the stars above them, a ship began its descent. And inside that ship, a tired man with scarred hands prepared to walk into hell. He was not a hero. He was not a warrior. He was just a person who could not ignore the cries of frightened children. And sometimes that was enough. The entrance to the Blackmere Caverns looked like a wound in the earth. Black rock jutted out from the ground at strange angles. A cold wind blew from inside, carrying the smell of wet stone and something else, something alive. Park Tiho stood at the edge, looking down into the darkness. Behind him, nearly 100 soldiers, scientists, and officials watched from a safe distance. They had set up monitoring equipment, medical stations, and emergency vehicles. Everything was ready for either a rescue or a recovery. Koreth Commander Reth walked up beside Tiho. The massive alien towered over the human, his armored body blocking out the sun. "You are truly going in there," Reth said. It was not a question. "Yes." With no weapons. Weapons will not help me. Reth shook his head slowly. His people had fought wars across the galaxy. They had killed beasts 10 times their size, but even they would not enter the Blackmare caverns. I do not understand your kind, Reth admitted. You are small. You are soft. You have no natural armor, no claws, no venom. Yet you walk into places that terrify the strongest warriors in the galaxy. Tiho checked his equipment one last time. He carried a breathing apparatus that would filter the toxins from the air. He wore special boots with motion dampeners that would reduce the vibrations of his footsteps, and he had a thermal blanket that could keep the cubs warm during the journey out. That was all. No weapons, no armor, nothing to fight with. Maybe that is why, Tiho said quietly. We have nothing to rely on except ourselves, so we learn to push past our fears. He pulled on the breathing mask and adjusted the straps. Then he turned on his headlamp, casting a thin beam of light into the darkness below. I will keep the communication channel open, Tiho said. You can see and hear everything through my camera. Do not send anyone after me, no matter what happens. And if you die? Tiho paused, then he smiled behind the mask. Then at least the cubs will not be alone at the end. He stepped into the darkness. The cave swallowed him immediately. The light from the surface disappeared within seconds, leaving only the narrow beam from his headlamp. The walls were slick with moisture and covered in strange fungal growths that glowed faintly blue. Tiho moved slowly, carefully placing each foot to minimize noise. The motion dampeners helped, but the cave floor was uneven and treacherous. One wrong step could send rocks tumbling down and alert every sketh in the cavern. On the surface, the monitoring team watched through Tiho's camera feed. The image was grainy and shaky, showing nothing but rocks and shadows. They could hear his breathing through the audio channel, slow and controlled. His heart rate is elevated, one of the medical technicians reported, but within acceptable limits. He is afraid, Reth observed. I can see it in the way he moves. Commander Hana had arrived from the horizon and now stood beside the Koreth. Of course he is afraid, she said. He is not stupid, but fear will not stop him. Deeper in the cave, Tiho encountered his first sketh. It hung from the ceiling like a rope of pale flesh, its long body coiled around a stalactite. It was at least 12 meters long, with skin so thin that Tiho could see the dark shapes of its organs pooling beneath. It had no eyes, just smooth white skin where eyes should have been. But its mouth was wide open, revealing rows of teeth as thin as needles. Tiho stopped. His heart hammered in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to do something. He did nothing. He stood perfectly still and focused on his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow, steady. The sketh's head turned toward him. Its tongue, long and forked, tasted the air. It could sense his bioelectrical field. It could feel the vibrations of his heartbeat. Tiho thought about the cubs, 3 small creatures, alone and scared. They were waiting for someone to save them. They were depending on him. He let that feeling fill his mind. Not fear, not aggression, just warmth, just the simple desire to help. The sketh paused, its tongue flicked again. Then slowly it retreated back into the shadows. Impossible, Reth breathed. On the surface, the monitoring team erupted in shocked murmurs. The sketh had let him pass. A predator that had driven back armed warriors had simply turned away from this unarmed human. Tiho exhaled slowly and continued forward. The sketh react to intent, he explained through the calm. They sense what you want to do before you do it. If you want to hurt them, they will attack first. If you are afraid, they see you as prey. But if you mean no harm and show no fear, they do not know what to do with you. That is insane, Reth replied. No creature can control its fear like that. Humans have been doing it for thousands of years. We used to hunt animals much larger than us with nothing but sticks and rocks. We learned to stay calm in the face of death because if we panicked, we died. Tiho moved deeper into the cave. The path grew narrower and more twisted. The air became thicker with the Sketh's paralytic toxin, but his breathing apparatus filtered most of it out. More Sketh appeared as he descended. They watched him from the shadows, their pale bodies shifting and coiling. Some followed him at a distance. Others hung from the ceiling like horrible decorations. None attacked. Tiho talked to them as he walked. He told them about his life on Earth, about the animals he had rescued, about his grandmother's garden where he used to catch fireflies as a child. His voice was low and calm, a constant stream of peaceful noise that filled the silence. "You are speaking to them," Reth said through the calm. "Why?" "Because silence is aggressive," Tiho replied. "Predators are silent when they hunt. Prey is silent when they hide. I am neither. I am just passing through." 2 hours into the descent, Tiho encountered a problem. The path split into 3 tunnels, each leading deeper into the mountain. His map showed that the cubs were somewhere below him, but he could not tell which tunnel would lead him to them. He closed his eyes and listened. The Sketh made no sound, the cave made no sound, but somewhere far below he heard something else, a high-pitched whimper, a cry. The cubs were calling for help. Tiho opened his eyes and walked into the left tunnel. The tunnel was narrow, forcing him to crouch in some places and crawl in others. His knees scraped against sharp rocks. His hands bled from small cuts, but he kept moving, following the sound of the cubs' cries. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. And there they were. 3 Velen cubs huddled together in a shallow alcove. Their silver-blue fur was matted with dirt and grime. Their large eyes were red from crying. Their tiny hands gripped each other so tightly that their knuckles had turned white. Around them, forming a loose circle, were 7 Sketh. The predators had been waiting. They had heard the cubs' cries, sensed their fear, and gathered for the hunt. But something had stopped them from attacking. Perhaps they were waiting for the right moment. Perhaps they were simply enjoying the terror of their prey. When Tiho entered the chamber, all 7 Sketh turned toward him. He stopped at the entrance and slowly raised his hands, showing that they were empty. "Hello," he said softly. "I am here to take the children home." The Sketh did not respond. They did not move. They simply watched, their eyeless faces pointed at this strange creature that had walked into their nest without fear. Tiho looked at the cubs. The smallest one lifted its head and stared at him with wide, tearful eyes. "It is okay," Tiho whispered. "I am here now. Everything will be okay." He took 1 step forward. The Sketh closest to him raised its head and opened its mouth, revealing hundreds of needle-thin teeth. Tiho did not stop. He took another step. On the surface, every single being watching the feed held their breath. Commander Hana's hands were shaking. Reth's claws had dug deep gouges into the stone floor. Tiho walked into the circle of predators. And he sat down. Park Tiho sat cross-legged in the middle of the chamber, surrounded by 7 Sketh. The predators towered over him, their pale bodies swaying slowly like trees in a gentle wind. Their eyeless faces pointed toward him, sensing every heartbeat, every breath, every tiny movement. On the surface, the entire monitoring team had gone silent. Commander Hana watched the feed with tears in her eyes. Reth stood frozen, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. "He sat down," someone whispered. "Why did he sit down?" "Because he understands them," Hana replied quietly. "The Sketh are confused. They have never encountered prey that does not run, does not fight, does not show fear. Tiho is taking away their only frame of reference." In the chamber, Tiho looked at the 3 cubs huddled in the alcove. They were staring at him with a mixture of fear and hope. The smallest one had stopped crying and was watching him with wide, curious eyes. Tiho smiled at them. "Hello, little ones," he said softly. "My name is Tiho. I have come a very long way to meet you. Your mother is waiting for you outside. She misses you very much." The cubs did not respond. They were too young to understand his language, but they understood his tone. It was warm, calm, gentle. It was the voice of someone who meant them no harm. Tiho began to hum. It was a simple melody, something his grandmother used to sing to him when he was a child. She had hummed it when he was scared of thunderstorms. She had hummed it when he had nightmares. She had hummed it when his parents were arguing and he could not sleep. The melody had no words. It was just a soft, rhythmic tune that rose and fell like waves on a calm sea. The Sketh reacted immediately. Their swaying stopped. Their bodies grew still. Their mouths, which had been hanging open in anticipation of a meal, slowly closed. The cubs reacted too. The smallest one tilted its head, its large eyes fixed on Tiho. The whimpering sounds that had been filling the chamber slowly faded. The tension in their tiny bodies began to ease. Tiho kept humming. He did not look at the Sketh. He kept his eyes on the cubs and his mind focused on the melody. He thought about his grandmother's kitchen, warm and bright, smelling of food and flowers. He thought about the feeling of being safe, of being loved, of knowing that everything would be okay. The Sketh began to sway again, but differently this time. They moved in rhythm with the melody, their bodies creating gentle waves of motion that rippled through the chamber. "What is happening?" Reth asked through the calm. His voice was barely a whisper. "He is calming them," one of the scientists replied, her voice filled with amazement. "All of them, the cubs and the Sketh. The vibrations from his humming are creating a pattern that the Sketh interpret as non-threatening. They are entering a state of passive observation." "That is impossible." "No," Hana said, "that is human." Tiho slowly opened his arms, spreading the thermal blanket across his lap. The silver material caught the light from his headlamp and shimmered in the darkness. "Come here," he said softly to the cubs, still humming between words. "Come to me, it is safe, I promise." The smallest cub moved first. It released its grip on its siblings and crawled toward Tiho on shaky legs. The Sketh watched but did not move. The cub crossed the distance between the alcove and Tiho, climbed into his lap, and pressed its face against his chest. Tiho felt the tiny heartbeat racing against his own. The cub was still terrified, but it had made a choice. It had chosen to trust him. "Good," Tiho whispered. "Very good, you are so brave." The second cub followed. It was slightly larger than the first, with darker fur around its eyes. It crawled across the stone floor, keeping its gaze on Tiho the entire time. When it reached him, it curled up beside its sibling, pressing close for warmth. The third cub hesitated. It was the largest of the three, and it seemed more cautious than its siblings. It looked at Tiho, then at the Sketh, then back at Tiho. "It is okay," Tiho said. "Take your time, I will wait." The cub did not move. One of the Sketh shifted, its coils scraping against the stone. The sound echoed through the chamber like a warning. The third cub whimpered and shrank back into the alcove. Tiho felt his heart ache. The cub was too scared. It had been in this darkness too long, surrounded by predators for too many days. Its fear had become so deep that even the promise of safety could not reach it. Tiho made a decision. He gently lifted the two cubs in his lap and placed them beside him, wrapping them in part of the thermal blanket. Then he stood up. The Sketh reacted instantly. Their bodies tensed. Their mouths opened. The air in the chamber seemed to grow colder. Tiho raised his hands slowly, showing that they were empty. Then he walked toward the third cub. The Sketh watched him. He could feel their attention like physical pressure against his skin. Every step he took was a step closer to death. But he kept walking. He reached the alcove and knelt down in front of the third cub. The tiny creature pressed itself against the wall, trembling with terror. "I know you are scared," Tiho said softly. "I know you have been alone for so long, but I need you to be brave just a little bit longer. Can you do that for me? Can you trust me?" The cub stared at him. Its large eyes were filled with tears. Tiho reached out his hand, palm up, and waited. The moment stretched into eternity. The Sketh watched. The other two cubs watched. The entire galaxy, it seemed, was holding its breath. Then the third cub reached out with one tiny hand and touched Tiho's palm. It was the gentlest touch Tiho had ever felt, like a butterfly landing on a flower, like a whisper of wind on a summer day. He scooped the cub into his arms and held it close. "There you go," he whispered. "I have you. I am not going to let anything hurt you." He carried the cub back to where its siblings waited. They immediately reached for each other, their small hands grasping and gripping until they were tangled together in a ball of blue-silver fur. Tiho wrapped the thermal blanket around all three of them. Then he looked up at the Sketh. The predators had not moved. They surrounded him in a loose circle, their eyeless faces pointed toward him, their bodies swaying gently in that strange, rhythmic way. "Thank you," Tiho said to them. "Thank you for letting me take them." He did not know if the Sketh understood. He did not know if they cared, but it felt right to say it anyway. He picked up the bundle of cubs, holding them against his chest. They weighed about 40 kilograms combined, which was heavy but manageable. The journey back to the surface would take at least 2 hours, and every step would be dangerous. But Tiho had done what everyone said was impossible. He had walked into a nest of apex predators, sat down among them, and taken their prey from under their noses. Now he just had to get out alive. He began to walk toward the tunnel entrance. The Sketh parted to let him pass, their bodies sliding aside like curtains being drawn. On the surface, the monitoring team erupted in cheers. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were simply sitting in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Commander Hana smiled and wiped her eyes. "That's Tiho," she said. "That's what humans do." Reth stared at the screen, his massive clawed hands trembling. "I have lived for 200 years," he said quietly. "I have fought in wars that destroyed planets. I have killed creatures that nightmares are made of, but I have never seen anything like this. I have never seen anyone like him." He turned to Hana, his eyes filled with something that might have been awe. "What are you people?" Hana thought about it for a moment. "We are just stubborn," she said. "Very, very stubborn." In the darkness of the Blackmare Caverns, Tiho began the long climb back to the surface. 3 cubs nestled against his chest, their tiny hearts beating in time with his own. He was still surrounded by monsters. He was still in terrible danger. But for the first time since entering the caves, he felt something warm in his chest. Hope. The journey back to the surface was harder than Tiho had expected. The narrow tunnel that had brought him down now felt like a throat trying to swallow him whole. He had to crouch, crawl, and sometimes squeeze through gaps barely wide enough for his shoulders, all while carrying 40 kilograms of frightened Velen cubs against his chest. The thermal blanket kept the cubs warm, but nothing could keep them calm. They whimpered softly against him, their tiny bodies trembling with each sound from the darkness. Every drip of water, every scrape of rock, every distant whisper of movement made them flinch. Tiho hummed to them as he walked, the same melody over and over. His throat grew dry and his voice grew tired, but he did not stop. The humming kept the cubs quiet, and quiet meant survival. The Sketh followed him. At first, Tiho thought they had lost interest. After he left the chamber where he found the cubs, the predators seemed to fade into the shadows. But as he climbed higher through the tunnels, he began to notice pale shapes in the corners of his vision. Sketh, watching from the darkness. Sketh, slithering along the ceiling above him. Sketh, keeping pace with his every step. They were not hunting him, not yet, but they were curious. This strange creature had walked into their home, taken their prey, and shown no fear. They did not know what to make of him, so they followed, waiting to see what he would do next. On the surface, The monitoring team tracked Tiho's progress through his camera feed and biosigns. His heart rate was elevated. His stress hormones were spiking. His body was screaming at him to run, to fight, to do anything other than walk calmly through a nest of monsters. But his footsteps remained steady. His breathing remained controlled. His humming never wavered. "How is he doing this?" one of the technicians asked. "His body is in full panic mode. He should be paralyzed with fear." Commander Hana shook her head. "Humans have a strange relationship with fear. We feel it just like everyone else. But we learned a long time ago that fear is just a signal. It tells us danger is near. It does not tell us what to do about it." "So he is ignoring it." "No, he is using it. Fear gives him energy, sharpness, focus. He is channeling it into something useful instead of letting it control him." Reth listened to this explanation in silence. He had spent his entire life training to fight, to hunt, to kill. His people were warriors. They believed that courage came from strength, from power, from the absence of weakness. But this human was weak. His body was soft and fragile. He had no weapons, no armor, no natural defenses. Yet he was doing something that Reth's greatest warriors could not. For the first time in his long life, Reth began to understand that courage had nothing to do with strength. Deep in the caverns, Tiho reached a narrow passage that climbed steeply upward. He would need both hands to climb, which meant he could not hold the cubs against his chest. He paused and looked at the three small faces peeking out from the thermal blanket. "I need to move you," he said softly. "It might feel strange, but I promise I will not drop you." He carefully rearranged the blanket, creating a makeshift sling that hung from his shoulders and wrapped around his back. He placed the cubs inside, one by one, until all three were pressed against his spine. They clung to the fabric with their tiny hands, their eyes wide with confusion. "Good," Tiho said. "Just hold on, I will do the rest." He began to climb. The passage was steep and slippery. His hands searched for grips on the wet stone, while his feet found purchase on narrow ledges. The weight of the cubs pulled him backward, threatening to send him tumbling into the darkness below. Sweat dripped down his face and into his eyes. His muscles burned. His lungs screamed for air. But he kept climbing, one handhold at a time, one footstep at a time. Halfway up the passage, the largest sketh he had seen yet appeared from the shadows above him. It was massive, at least 20 meters long, with a body as thick as a tree trunk. Its pale flesh glowed faintly in the darkness, and its mouth hung open, revealing teeth longer than Tiho's fingers. The predator blocked the entire passage. There was no way around it. Tiho stopped climbing and held perfectly still. The cubs on his back had gone silent, their tiny bodies frozen with terror. The sketh lowered its head until its face was less than a meter from Tiho's. He could feel its breath on his skin, cold and wet and smelling of something ancient. "Hello," Tiho said quietly. The sketh did not respond. Its tongue flicked out, tasting the air around him. Tiho looked into the smooth white skin where eyes should have been. The creature could not see him. It could only sense him, feel him, taste his presence in the air. "You are not hungry," Tiho said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "You have already eaten recently. I can tell from the way you move. Satisfied, slow." The sketh's head tilted slightly. "You are curious. You have lived in these caves for a long time and you have seen many creatures come and go. Prey animals that run and scream, predators that fight and die, but you have never seen anything like me." Tiho slowly released one hand from its grip on the rock and reached out toward the sketh. On the surface, Hana's hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "Tiho, don't." But it was too late. Tiho's palm pressed gently against the sketh's head. The creature's entire body shuddered. A ripple ran through its coils from head to tail, like a wave passing through water. Tiho felt the cold, smooth skin beneath his fingers. It was like touching living stone. Beneath the surface, he could feel the creature's heartbeat, slow and powerful. "I am not your enemy," Tiho said. "I am not your prey. I am just someone passing through. I mean you no harm, and I ask for none in return." The Sketh's mouth slowly closed, its tongue retracted, its body relaxed. Then slowly, impossibly, it lowered itself to the floor of the passage and pressed itself against the wall, clearing the path. Tiho let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "Thank you," he said. He continued climbing, passing within arm's reach of the massive predator. The cubs on his back were completely silent, too shocked to even whimper. When they were safely past, Tiho heard a sound behind him, a low, rumbling noise that echoed through the passage. He did not look back, but he smiled. The Sketh was humming. It was not the same melody Tiho had sung to the cubs. It was something older, stranger, a sound that came from deep within the creature's chest. But there was something in it that felt like a response, an acknowledgement, a farewell. The final stretch of the journey took another hour. Tiho's body was exhausted. His arms shook with every movement. His legs threatened to give out with every step. But he kept going, driven by something stronger than muscle and bone. When he finally saw light ahead, actual sunlight filtering through the entrance of the caves, he nearly collapsed with relief. He stumbled toward the light, blinking as his eyes adjusted. The brightness was overwhelming after hours in total darkness. Then he was out. He stood at the entrance of the Blackmire Caverns, squinting against the setting sun. The sky above was painted in shades of orange and purple. The air was clean and fresh, filling his lungs like a gift. Behind him, the darkness of the cave seemed to sigh. The Sketh did not follow him into the light. They watched from the shadows for a long moment, then retreated back into their home. On the surface, chaos erupted. People were running toward him. Medical teams, soldiers, officials, all rushing to meet him. Cheers filled the air. Someone was crying, someone else was laughing. Reth reached him first. The massive Koreth commander dropped to one knee in front of Tiho, bringing himself down to human eye level. There were tears on his face. Actual tears, something his species was not supposed to be capable of producing. "What are you?" Reth asked, his voice breaking. "What are you people?" Tiho smiled tiredly. He carefully removed the sling from his back and cradled the 3 cubs in his arms. "Just someone who is really bad at giving up," he said. Then his legs finally gave out, and Commander Hana caught him before he hit the ground. The medical tent was chaos. Doctors and nurses rushed back and forth, checking vitals, running tests, and arguing about treatment protocols. Park Tiho lay on a cot in the center of it all, an oxygen mask over his face and monitoring equipment attached to every part of his body. He had been unconscious for 6 hours. The Velan cubs had been taken to a separate tent where specialists examined them. They were dehydrated, malnourished, and traumatized, but alive. Against all odds, they were alive. Commander Hana sat beside Tiho's cot, refusing to leave even when the doctors told her she was in the way. She held his hand, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. "You stupid, brave, impossible man," she whispered. "You did it again." Reth stood at the entrance of the tent, too large to fit inside without knocking things over. He had not moved from that spot since Tiho was carried in. His eyes never left the unconscious human. Other Koreth warriors had gathered behind him. Word had spread quickly about what had happened in the caves. The human who had walked through a nest of Sketh. The human who had touched the largest predator and lived. The human who had done what their greatest hunters could not. They watched in silence, trying to understand. Outside, the Galactic News Network had set up broadcasting equipment. Reporters from dozens of worlds were waiting for updates, for interviews, for any scrap of information about the impossible rescue. The footage from Tiho's camera had already been transmitted across the galaxy. Billions of beings had watched the human sit down among predators and hummed to frighten children. The reaction was overwhelming. Messages of praise flooded in from every corner of known space. Species that had never given humans a second thought suddenly wanted to know more. Who were these creatures? Where did they come from? How did they do what they did? On Earth, Park Tiho became a name known to every child and adult. His face appeared on news feeds, his story retold in 100 languages. He was called a hero, a legend, a symbol of everything humanity could be. Tiho would have hated all of it. He woke up on the second day, groggy and confused. The first thing he saw was Hana's face, tired and tear-stained but smiling. "Hey," she said softly, "welcome back." Tiho blinked. His throat was dry and his body felt like it was made of lead. "The cubs," he croaked, "are they?" "They are fine, better than fine. The doctors say they will make a full recovery." Tiho closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Relief washed over him, so strong that it brought tears to his eyes. "Good," he whispered, "that is good." Hana squeezed his hand. "You scared me, Tiho. You really scared me this time." "Sorry." He opened his eyes and gave her a weak smile. "I will try to be less scary next time." "There will not be a next time. I am locking you in the cargo bay and never letting you out again. The animals in the cargo bay need feeding. Then I will lock you in somewhere else." They both laughed, the sound thin and tired but genuine. The tent flap opened and a Velan woman stepped inside. She was tall and graceful, with silver-blue fur that shimmered in the artificial light. Her eyes were large and round, the same eyes that her children had. Her name was Yunha. She was the cub's mother. She moved toward Tiho's cot slowly, as if afraid that sudden movement might break something. Tears streamed down her face, leaving dark trails in her fur. Tiho tried to sit up, but his body refused. Yunha knelt beside him and took his hands in hers. "You saved my children," she said. Her voice was soft and musical, like wind through leaves. "You walked into darkness and brought them back to me." Tiho did not know what to say. He had never been good with words, especially in moments like this. "I just did what anyone would do," he managed. Yunha shook her head. "No, no one else would do what you did. The greatest warriors in the galaxy ran from that darkness. Only you went in. Only you came back." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. It was the Velan gesture of eternal gratitude, a bond that could never be broken. "You are family now," Yunha whispered. "From this day forward you are part of our house. My children will know your name. Their children will know your name. For as long as the Velan exist, we will remember what you did for us." Tiho felt something warm spread through his chest. It was not pride or satisfaction. It was something simpler than that, something more human. It was the feeling of having done the right thing. 3 days later, Tiho was discharged from the medical tent. He walked out into the sunlight, squinting against the brightness. A crowd had gathered outside, hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all waiting to see him. He froze. He had never liked crowds. Commander Hana appeared beside him and took his arm. "Just smile and wave," she said. "Then we can sneak you onto the ship and get out of here." Tiho forced a smile and raised his hand. The crowd erupted in cheers. Reth pushed through the mass of beings and stopped in front of Tiho. The massive Koreth commander looked down at the small human with an expression that might have been respect. "I have lived for 200 years, Reth said. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed feats of strength and courage that would take your breath away. But I have never seen anything like what you did in those caves." He extended his massive clawed hand. "It is an honor to know you, Park Tiho." Tiho shook the offered hand. Reth's grip was gentle, careful not to crush the fragile human fingers. "The honor is mine," Tiho said. A reporter pushed forward, holding a recording device. "Mr. Park, the galaxy wants to know, how did you do it? How did you walk through those predators without fear?" Tiho thought about it for a moment. I was afraid, he admitted. I was terrified every single second I was in those caves, but I was also thinking about three small children, alone in the dark, waiting for someone to save them, and that thought was louder than the fear. But the Sketh sense fear. They should have attacked you. They sensed my fear, yes, but they also sensed something else. They sensed that I meant no harm. They sensed that my only goal was to protect those children. Maybe that confused them. Maybe it made them curious. Or maybe they understood in their own way that I was not their enemy. Tiho paused, remembering the moment when the largest Sketh had lowered its head to let him pass, remembering the strange humming sound it had made as he walked away. Predators are not evil, he said quietly. They are just following their nature, and sometimes if you approach them with respect instead of aggression, they will show you respect in return. The reporter nodded, writing furiously. Other questions were shouted from the crowd, but Hana stepped in front of Tiho protectively. That is enough for today. Mr. Park needs rest. She guided him through the crowd toward the waiting transport shuttle. Tiho kept his head down, avoiding the cameras and the staring eyes. Just before they reached the shuttle, three small figures burst through the crowd and crashed into his legs. The Velen cubs. They wrapped their tiny arms around him and refused to let go. Their mother followed close behind, smiling through her tears. They have been asking for you since they woke up, Yunha said. They refuse to sleep unless you sing to them. Tiho knelt down and gathered the cubs into his arms. They pressed their faces against his chest, making happy chirping sounds. Hey, little ones, he said softly, I missed you too. Hana watched this scene with a knowing smile. You realize they are going to want to come with you, right? Tiho looked at the three small faces looking up at him with absolute trust and adoration. He looked at Yunha, who nodded slightly. They have decided that you are their second parent, Yunha explained. In Velen culture, this bond is sacred. They will want to stay near you. Tiho should have protested. He should have explained that he was just a rescue specialist, that he had no business raising alien children, that his life was dangerous and unstable and completely unsuitable for young ones. Instead, he smiled. I have a three-legged furry thing in my cargo bay that will probably want to meet them, he said. We can be one big weird family. The cubs chirped happily. Yunha laughed through her tears. Hana shook her head but could not hide her own smile. And Park Tiho, the man who had walked through darkness and brought back the light, carried his new family onto the ship and headed home. In the years that followed, the story of the Blackmire rescue spread across the galaxy. It was told in schools and temples, in bars and council chambers. It became a symbol of what humans were capable of, a reminder that courage was not about the absence of fear, but about what you chose to do despite it. And somewhere on a small ship traveling between the stars, three Velen cubs slept peacefully, while a human sang them songs from a world they had never seen, dreaming of adventures yet to come. The end.